Hello, welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. When we talk about those things, we discuss the underlying connections and the root causes that help us discover what is really true and can even help shape our lives. In addition, we've been thinking a lot about what it takes to develop an antiviral mindset in a decaying world. I'm Mike,
Indeed.
and you are Luke.
Yeah, I'm Luke. We never really tell people
I know,
which is which.
Yeah.
I feel like that's because we assume that everyone who's listening knows us.
Yeah.
I do want to say we only have one camera today.
One camera, that's
So
true.
our cameras are our phones, and my three
See how
sons.
this view looks.
My three sons are now in sports all at the same time,
yeah.
so they take their phones with them,
Yeah.
of course, wherever they go.
So today we're going to talk about a few political things. We're going to talk about maybe a couple theological things, and I'm hoping we'll pick up a couple ongoing discussions that we've hit on things before. I know I have a couple things to respond as I've thought about it, but let's start with this question: skipping the debates. Trump is skipping the debates, and as you mentioned, he's actually not shadowed.
He's competing with the debates.
Really with Tucker and. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because then it's a Fox News issue also, right?
Mm-hmm. Because Fox News is hosting the debates.
Yeah.
And Fox is desperate for a little pick-me-up these days.
And they dumped Tucker as a part of their lawsuit.
Yeah.
And Tucker's on Twitter.
So Trump and Tucker can both stick it to Fox.
Interesting, right? Okay, Here's the basic question, though. Skipping the debates, what do you think? Is that a good thing, bad thing?
I mean, I don't think it hurts him at all, to be honest.
I don't think it hurts him at all either.
Yeah, whether it gains him
Not the same
traction.
question as good or bad, though.
Well, good for who? Is it good for him?
I know.
If it doesn't hurt him, then it's good for him. If he's actually going to do a long form with Tucker, I think that stands. I feel like this is the moment where Tucker is going to be tested. Is he actually going to put it to Trump like he did the other candidates at that Iowa?
Yeah. I remember.
Although I'll say he didn't really put it to DeSantis or Vivek or even Nikki Haley as much, but he did. He hit after the easy targets
that was
with
the big one.
Pence and Asa Hutchinson.
Apparently, they have a long-standing
feud,
dislike for each other.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of that in.
Tucker came out smelling sweet as a rose on that, though.
Yeah, he did.
Pence came out really badly.
Well, he needs to. I'm done with Pence.
It would be not a surprise if it came up, if one of the other candidates talked about something along the lines of, I know that Vice President Pence is not really interested in that kind of thing right now. Just,
yeah.
a little shiv in the side. Do you think it's good overall?
I don't think it's good. Well, probably. I think that he has never as yet been the focus of attack of any of the Republican candidates except DeSantis.
True.
All the other ones are being nice to Trump all day long. And so if he can't get on a stage and stand toe-to-toe with DeSantis, that's a problem for DeSantis.
Yeah. He wins by not doing this, I think.
Well, maybe. I don't know. Because I don't think we'll be able to vote for him. I think that's going to push everything. Because I think they're going to take him off ballots because he's going to get found guilty.
Yeah.
On
I don't know that he will.
It's dozens and dozens of charges. He's not going to snake all of them.
Yeah.
And once that happens, that gives the green light. But it's just going to get
appealed. Nothing's going to happen. It's going to take 2 years.
But if you're a convicted felon when the ballots come around, there's enough states could pull his name to say, look, he's a felon.
If that was an issue, don't you think he'd go to the Supreme Court? Because this is ridiculous.
But even then, the Supreme Court, because it's state by state, decides who's on the ballot. So then you got to fight state by state Supreme Courts. It's the same thing with fighting the election interference question. It's 25 different jurisdictions. It's who has standing. It's they haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
It's all that confiscation obfuscation. Obfuscation.
Yeah.
That betrays him.
Okay. Open and closed mindset.
Oh yeah.
What
Okay.
do you got going on?
So this was a topic I heard about and then discussed with my students, and a lot of the stuff I'm inspired by are these conversations I have with teenagers. Right. We were talking about what's the right time because there's a personality trait called openness to experience, and it's thought to be pretty rigid. It might increase at younger ages and decrease as you age. Right. So older folks are less open to new things. Sure. I mean, we all kind of get that. But the question was, is there a time to shift yourself deliberately into a more open mindset? Or vice versa? When's the time to say, you know what, we're not trying to come up with new inventions. We're just doing what we know how to do. And the best, I heard somebody describe it as when you're designing the building, you need to have an open mind. But when it's time to build it, you need to have a closed mind. You can't forever be redesigning things.
That's true.
There's a time to just build it, just to do the thing, to follow the plan.
Yeah.
And that made me think of like not only my own life, but like personalities of people I know, right? Who are redesigning, who are always dreaming.
Yeah.
Someone who's a dreamer is just perpetually open-minded.
Right.
But as someone who's less of a dreamer myself, I'm more of a planner. I tend to find it really easy to say, you know what, I love making a new plan, but then I want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the plan takes years, I'm
Mm-hmm.
totally content. I don't stop and redesign all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to ask the kids, like, does it matter? Like, does the personality difference matter? Does it matter that we are conscious of when we're open-minded? Because as conservatives, right, we tend to want to be more closed-minded and say, well, no, some of these things we don't need to rehash.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
what society should be,
Yeah,
you know, what the
right.
family should look like, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts. Like, do you coach your kids on that? Are you aware of it yourself?
Yeah. So my first thought, as you were talking about it, was this is an ongoing discussion from a different vantage point, and that is personality test and just universal
coming up,
personality issues. Where are these universally things that are generally true, and we'll do the 80-20 split, 80% true and 20% exception. But 80%, if this is true, is it another insight into personalities? Which I know you don't like the tests.
I don't. It's not that I don't. Well, some of them I don't like. I would say
Yeah,
that.
you like some more than others, or some less than others.
No, I mean, there are definitely some that are more scientifically rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
I think people use them to feel like they've got a grasp on the world.
Yeah, so you just like
so
it when
that's
they
okay.
make hard boundaries and say, well, this is what is, and
I
that what
think
you
that's
dislike?
part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have all been told by someone, well, you're just one of those.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you know, that always rubs the wrong way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And personality tests, it's
Use
like
the
they're designed for
dismiss.
that.
Yeah,
But part of what that does is, you know, trying to understand people can feel really chaotic. Like you
Yeah.
just can't figure out why they're doing these things.
yeah,
And so if you can see what seems like chaotic behavior or random and be like, oh, actually, I see their motives. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that takes a lot of stress out of things. So in that way, it's really good. It's really useful if it's
to
accurate.
understand. Yeah, to help understand.
What I've seen them also do, though, is people pigeonhole themselves or they refuse to continue to grow. They say, well,
Yeah.
that's just who I am.
That's true.
I'm in this category.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
means I'm that way. Look, it says it on the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And those people are psychologists. They
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or whoever comes up with it.
And plus, things change. I like enjoy the Myers-Briggs. I've taken it several times. I've probably taken it 50 times in my life, online, and just to see
Consistently the same
yeah,
results?
basically consistently. But there was a season in which I was. I have two numbers that will switch depending on my context of life.
What is it?
Well, the extrovert introvert.
Okay.
I'm on the introvert side, but in certain contexts, if I'm in a job for a certain amount of time, I start living more extrovertedly.
And
so
is that
it
a
comes
sign
out
that you're
more freely.
enjoying that role that you're in or that environment?
No, I think no, not necessarily, because the one that I saw it the most clearly was in a job I was not enjoying.
So
But
you were sort of
demanded
faking
me
it.
of it. Yeah.
You just knew that was part of the role, and
Yeah.
therefore
And
you had
so
to do
in
it.
the tests, I would come out a little more extroverted, but the reality is I was still an introvert because I needed to carve out time to step away to re-sort and organize internally.
Well, so the popular definition of extrovert introvert,
It's totally wrong.
it's too generic because I
Yes.
think 99% of people need time alone to step away, or with a small core
what it
group.
really is what gives you energy. That's the whole distinction
Yeah,
between introvert
yeah.
and extrovert. And extrovertedness
But
does
that
not
would-
give me energy. I have to be alone in order. And so, but in a high extroverted context, and I function that way, I can sustain it for a period of time, but I do crash at the end.
So here's my
So
question,
I
though.
come out on the test as extroverted for a season.
Like I can think of groups of 3 to 5 people and specific people, not anybody, who if I'm with them, it does give me energy. Right. And then there are times like at church,
But how long are you with them?
I don't know. I've never reached that limit. Yeah. But there are environments at church where I'm extroverting, for example.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm having a ton of fun,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I also find a lot quiet time afterward.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Well, that's the thing. People think that introverts aren't extroverted, but they are. That's not the issue of whether they can be outgoing and talkative. The issue is what drains the internal batteries.
But what I'm saying is I don't think it's a either or. I don't think you can categorize extrovert or introvert. I think it's on a sliding scale.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So on my scale, I'm on the introvert side, but there's certain contexts which appear to nudge me over to the other side.
Yeah, but I think that's 80% of people, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I don't know. Maybe. I think there are people that are more and less.
Of the people who I've talked about, extrovert, introvert, almost everyone I can think of says, "Oh, I'm such an introvert."
Yeah. I don't know if that's always the case, but
it's not always.
Yeah.
I can think of two people who say, "Well, yeah, I'm an extrovert."
Well, I'll give
but they
an
sort of
example.
it's sort of like they're admitting to something
an
that everyone
extrovert
else.
friend that I had is some years ago comes back from a trip, and this is part of pastoral staff and ministry couples.
Yeah.
They come back from a trip, and they're so sad people aren't there to greet them. Most people
Like
come
at their
back
house?
at their house, the airport, just some kind of all the people they haven't been away with.
Oh, yeah.
Right? A lot of people, I think, come back on a trip and it takes them a couple days. It's actually tiring to go on a trip
Yeah.
or some kind of long vacation.
Right.
And this was a 3-month sabbatical. They come back and they're depressed that because they missed all these people and it just gives them great energy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other people would say, I want to see my friends, but I want to get home from the airport. We had a long day flying.
Yeah,
I want to sleep for like 2 days and get ready, and then I want to say hi to everybody. So
Right, right.
Anyway, so where do you open
Wait, so
and
that was
close?
one.
Oh yeah,
What was the second one?
Oh, the P and J.
And remind me.
So
Judging and perceiving?
So the judging is the more perfectionistic kind of thing, and the perceiving is more the artistic.
So that would almost be open and closed.
Yes. So in general, I'm a J, which is judging or things ordered.
Yeah.
But in certain contexts, the P, you can't say Ness.
The perceiving.
Yes, the perceiving is a stronger faculty, which is the artistic dreaming
Yeah.
element.
It brings it out in you.
Yeah. So,
Well, and that.
but
see,
I'm an INTJ. That's what I fundamentally.
that description of bringing out the other side, to me, that sounds really fun. Like part of what I think of as like, if I was being a good friend or even a good leader, is that I'm bringing out the part of someone's personality that they
That's so
neglect
interesting.
or they don't touch
See, I
very
think
often.
the exact opposite. I think a part of being a good leader is what do you do well? And I want to see you bring that to this community.
But so here's what I mean,
I want
right?
to find everybody what they do well.
There's a place of belonging in a working environment that if you can achieve it, you'll find facets of people's personality arise. They
That's
knew
true.
were there, but
That's
not
true.
everybody gets to see that.
That's true. There's beauty in that.
Yeah. And what I don't mean is like, oh, you're not good at extroverting. Let's work on that.
Right. So you're open and closed. What does that do for you on second thought? What does it give you insight into something? Does it make you think a set of thoughts that you hadn't thought? Where does it take you?
Well, so what I find among teenagers, right, the classic know-it-all tendency that teenagers exhibit, where they feel like they got things figured out.
Yeah.
And they do a lot more than they used to.
Yeah.
Is that I want to encourage them to know when to be open and when to be closed. So especially in a time where ideologies reign supreme, if you're always open-minded, you'll fall prey to some nefarious ideas as much as people.
Yeah.
And so training them to say, okay, this is a hostile intellectual environment, or this is a place where I got to think differently. This is a place where I can learn.
Yeah.
And I was watching or reading about I can't remember, it was Oxford or it was some prestigious college where they had reprimanded or maybe even fired a tenured professor for espousing unorthodox academic views, and basically they were questioning COVID. And so this person was fired, and the declaration from folks I follow, right, in our persuasion of thinking, was like, science is dead. And if the universities aren't open to new ideas, then they're no longer universities. They're dead.
That's a genuine observation it's an alarming.
And it's what you would think. I want to send my kid to see the world as a bigger place. Like that's why you would send your kid to college.
Yeah.
But you're entrusting their minds to these professors.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't. I don't have that trust.
All right.
I
So
don't
there's
know.
a value in open, and then it's time to close, and going back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is just take a pause early on and just emphasize this idea that if you like what you're listening to,
Hey.
a couple thoughts. One, take the conversations that you hear us having and go have them with someone else.
There you go.
The second thing we want to say is, hey, whatever media you're using here, if it's YouTube, I kind of thought we were going to see ourselves on this, but maybe that would be distracting. But YouTube, like it, or if there's other medium you're using, like it. The way algorithms work, it spreads things the more you like. And so if you like something, hitting that like button is a good thing. And the last I'd say is recommend.
Yeah.
Hey, I enjoyed listening to these guys. You should try them, and just tell a friend, recommend it. So
Yeah, I give my wife a hard time. She says, when are you guys going to do another episode? And I said, oh, you're caught up? And she says, yeah, you guys need to like make a schedule or something.
yeah.
And I said, oh, have you shared it?
And
And she's like, no.
Yeah, there we go.
The one thing I would say too, I would love to hear from people. If you did have a conversation or something we talked about that sparked thought, that led to something meaningful, let us know. Send us a line.
Okay, another question.
Okay.
Is it Trump or bust?
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I've read a few articles recently. People are trying to say Trump's the nominee. This is why he doesn't have to debate. He's the nominee. It's not even close.
The guy's going to be 80 years old.
I know. So but he's not acting like it. His senility has not come yet.
I saw this
the question
amazing.
Is it Trump or bust? Is that it for right now?
I don't think so. No.
You think there's legitimate options? Name one legitimate option.
Well, I mean, the second and the third runner.
They are.
Vivek,
Nobody has ever gotten over
DeSantis.
23%
Yeah.
of interest by the polling, right? That's not good. DeSantis has hit a wall.
The majority of people who are saying they're still for Trump
Yeah.
are flexible in that, right? That they're willing to vote for someone else. And a lot of the polling,
That's true.
Nationwide polling is almost completely useless in
Yeah.
America's presidential process.
Yeah.
You got Iowa first. You got
Oh, I don't know.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, I don't.
And then it's like you're rolling up to Super Tuesday. There's another one, I think, before that. And so those states are really the deciders. After Super Tuesday, it's almost guaranteed to be over. So if DeSantis can pull Iowa, which there's reason to believe he's still a hope, right?
Double digits behind.
Well, it depends on the poll.
Okay.
And the problem is, and I've heard multiple people talk about this, that the pollsters all admit that it's harder and harder to poll accurately anywhere.
Yeah.
Because it's like
there's no trust.
Their polling method of choice has always been the home phone number. Well, the home phones are gone.
Yeah.
And especially for anyone under 40.
Well,
so now you're trying to text them?
And I would say that from
know
a
what I mean?
conservative perspective, I think there's a lot of people who don't want to do a poll. They don't trust. If they get a call, they'll just hang up.
That's right.
Because it has been skewed.
So that is the big arms race, is how do we actually know what people are thinking?
I know.
Which, like we've said before, in times past, elections are what really give you that sense of like, oh, we know what people are thinking. But if elections aren't accurate or trustworthy, we never do.
Yeah.
And then you can't be free because you can't establish the will of the people.
Yeah.
There's no means.
Yeah, that's another set of issues.
But here's what I say. And the reason I would never say Trump or bust until Trump is officially the nominee is I don't think he's the best candidate. I just simply don't. I don't think he was the best candidate. Well, that's not true. He was the best candidate when he ran of the Republicans. In the
You're
sense,
talking 2016 now.
I'm talking 2016, in the sense that he got more done than any of the others would.
Which is funny because you say that, and yet at the time you've said on air, so
I didn't believe he would be.
You didn't vote for him.
I had no reason to believe he would be. He had no track record. He was obviously liberal in his lifestyle
Yeah,
and
but
in
when
his
you say
beliefs.
you didn't vote for him, that's when it basically him or Hillary, and I think you did some other person or whatever.
Yeah. I wrote in
Wrote, yeah.
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney. That's right.
I'm gonna keep
gotta
saying
write
that.
that.
I posted it on my Facebook too. A picture of my ballot
hilarious.
with Mitt Romney's name written in.
goodness. You took a picture
as
of your
protest. Yeah.
Anyway, but it's interesting that you say that when you look back at 2016, you see a clarity, and then in 2020 you do vote for him, I think.
Yep.
And then, but you have more reservations, and then even now, you have more reservations.
So here's the trick.
It's almost like an inverse.
Well, Yeah, because you got to go with what you know, right?
Yeah.
So what I knew in 2016 was very little as far as this guy. Yeah, he says he's going to build a wall or whatever, and that he's for the American people, but he's really for himself, and it's obvious to everyone. So will the American people be able to persuade him, that we'll give you this name, this legacy, if you'll give us what we need as far as building the economy and all those things? And then he did. Shockingly, he actually put in the Supreme Court justices who would fight abortion, right?
Did. Yeah, that's
Everybody else says, oh, they will. And then they put a middle of the road guy.
I know.
Because they're establishment people.
I know.
So he did the things, and everything up to March 2020
I know.
was amazing.
That's exactly.
And then he became the
right.
worst president ever after that.
Okay, we'll say
Like
why
he
you
literally,
think that, 'cause I
he
think you and I
literally
might
was in
agree.
charge of a government that instituted and pulled off the
Yes.
worst genocide in American
I did
history.
read an article that said Trump deserves to be voted in, except what he did with COVID takes him out.
It does, in my view, it takes him out. And here's why.
There's something there.
Because if they can do that to him, and here's what I mean.
Wait,
I don't
wait,
mean
they do that. What do you mean?
Well, they knew that he was a germaphobe, that he was extra sensitive.
This is my theory.
He's extra sensitive to contagions.
Yes.
And so they built up this machine, and whether they released the pandemic deliberately, which it would
Yeah.
look like China may have done, but I mean, Fauci was funding it. Fauci was overseeing
this
it.
is inexcusable to me for him to have allowed Fauci to take the lead.
But here's what I mean is, it was his responsibility to protect America from that.
Yes, I
And
agree
instead,
with you.
he handed it to the people
I agree with you.
who masterminded the thing in the first
Yes.
place. And even if you don't consider the virus itself to be a deliberate, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I would say the evidence, it's obviously, I'm convinced it's a lab leak.
Yeah, I do too.
I
do too.
think the evidence is clear that Fauci was behind the funding of the
Yes.
Wuhan laboratory.
Yep.
I think there was definitely nefarious intent around who would release what information about what kind of virus it was.
Yeah.
They
tried to hide
concealed it. They lied.
Yep.
They lied about
That's all
masks and
coming
all those
out.
things.
Slowly but
But
surely.
then the biggest deal to me is to roll out those untested shots, vaccines,
Yeah.
to mandate them,
Yes.
to
I
mandate
agree.
or to restrict access to proven and effective medications
Yeah.
like ivermectin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That they won the freaking Nobel Prize for.
Yeah.
And now suddenly it's dangerous and you shouldn't
Yeah,
take it,
yeah,
even
yeah.
though billions of people around the world have taken it as an
He
antiviral.
lost the narrative and he couldn't get it back.
He didn't even know he lost it. He still hasn't confessed
He
to
hasn't
that loss.
on the vaccine aspect. I agree
well,
with you.
on the whole thing.
I think he tried to use the rolling it out quickly and he did do that. He worked with these companies. He did a tremendous job. It was just, I think he thought that might rescue him from the pit he gotten into.
So here's what
wasn't.
I've seen, right? With the great thing about Trump is he's willing to fight,
Yes.
right? He couldn't find people to fight with him. Everybody that he hired, he eventually fired them with.
Lots of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that was like a third of the executive branch appointments never even got filled. Like he just couldn't
Yeah.
get the people.
Yeah. But that was because everybody's colluding against him in that environment.
That's right. But part of that
deep
is,
state thing is not with him.
but also because he's so embarrassing to someone who just wants to be like, I want to do a good job, even as a
Yeah.
Christian, right? To
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
I don't want to go work for this guy
Yeah.
who's talking about grabbing women.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
if he's
yeah.
not saying I did it, he's saying I can do it. It's
Yeah.
this. It's like God. This
Well,
guy is
even that, I think the thing I've noticed, which makes me disturbed, is if he were to win again, who does he draw from? Because he has alienated so many people who formerly supported him, right?
right.
And they've just gotten tired of it. And partly I think it's his fault.
Who's going to
but
go?
partly-
Yeah, you're going to have a bunch of 25-year-old.
I know, which
Ma-
might
MAGA
not
bros.
necessarily be bad.
It
but-
might not. So
Yeah.
here's my thinking though. DeSantis Trump is the hands-off leader. He's going to cast this MAGA
Right.
vision, and then he's going to tell people to go do it. But he's not even going to. And this is what he did with COVID, right? Pence, it's on you.
Yeah.
And now he's got scapegoats, but he doesn't actually execute.
Yeah.
And DeSantis is cast the MAGA vision or used or believe it at least.
Yeah.
And then he's the executor, right? He makes
Yeah.
it happen.
Yeah.
And that's his track record. But now you've also got Vivek Ramaswamy, which I keep listening to this guy. I'm like, he actually casts a better vision than Trump for a positive
the problem
future.
is, I just read some more things on Ramaswamy also, and he's not really been hit with questioning because he has been fairly irrelevant.
Yeah, well,
And
he took the second place
It's starting to
in a couple of polls.
and there's starting to be questions more, and it is surprising some of the things he said that I was like, oh, I don't agree with that at all. For example, he has made publicly the statement we should not be supporting Israel the way we support financially.
Interesting.
Two reasons. One, because the money comes back to the United States arms maker industry anyway.
Right.
But second, 80% of it apparently. But the second reason he goes, we should disperse it equitably amongst the Arab nations.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh dude, and that's not even accounting for, which I don't know where you are, but I'm not in the evangelical pro-Israel because of the Bible. Certain things, I don't see it that way. But there is a large part of the United States who does have that theological issue with Israel.
Yeah.
And I think that's stepping in it.
Well, so the other side of it,
He's not been examined in those areas, my point.
there hasn't been pushback.
There hasn't.
Yeah.
On you believe such and such and such and whatnot.
Right.
So we might be seeing the best of him in a sense. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I thought so
Well,
too.
and I think part of what's bolstering him, as far as the media is pushing the best of him, is that everybody's targets are on DeSantis. On the Republican side, DeSantis is the only guy getting criticized that I've seen.
Besides Trump.
Besides Pence. No, I don't see any other candidates for president who are significant targeting Trump. Nikki Haley doesn't target Trump.
The other
Vivek.
candidates targeting him.
So
yeah.
the leftist media, who Republicans don't care about anyway.
Right. So we're just talking about the Republican candidates. I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason for that because he's the only
Because he's
one
the
that
real
can win.
front runner. Yeah.
He's a front runner by a long ways.
Yeah. Well, not so much.
It's only going up and up, whatever it is.
DeSantis?
No. Trump. Oh.
No,
I
I'm
don't
saying
see
they're
them
not criticizing Trump.
I know. Because they're not going to win. And
Which
he
means
is.
they're just applying for a job.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only one person who's not doing that, and that is DeSantis.
Right.
He wants to win.
So the way they got, because the media are the ones who got Trump in. The amount of free press he got in 2016 and 2015, because they thought it was laughable that he would be the Republican nomination. So they pumped him up. It was ridiculous. It was like 10-1 from any other candidate. Even when it was down to Trump versus Cruz, it was like Cruz couldn't get
Trump's
anyone
magnetic.
to pay any attention to. No.
He is.
He is magnetic, but that's not why they did it. The media,
Yeah, it is.
CNN, MSNBC, all of the leftist media put Trump on the pedestal because they thought anybody could beat this guy, even Hillary.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I also think their ratings.
But they
are salivating.
They
over
openly
ratings.
claim that's what they did.
Yeah.
So now what they're doing is it's Trump. They know DeSantis is the only one that can make things actually change if he gets in.
Yeah.
I
don't
even
know.
if Trump got in, he'll be hamstrung.
I think some of that is rear view mirror saying I thought this because everybody could say I knew Trump was going to win or whatever, but I thought he was going to win when he came down the elevator for like a year and a half. But then when it got to election night, I thought, I don't know, man.
Well, I think
He was
what I'm
killing
saying
Hillary,
is that
but-
the media put Trump up to win the Republican nomination, knowing or believing that he
they
could
say
never
that
win the
now.
general.
I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm not sure if I buy that. So they say that now about 2022. I just read an article. They said the Democrat Party supported and even gave money to MAGA candidates, knowing that they're going to be too extreme for the country and they wouldn't win. I don't believe that.
Well, it's true.
I
Like
don't
they
believe
actually,
that.
they have to document and report the
I think that there
donations.
was some element of that, but not the way they're saying this is how we turned this red wave from being a red wave. I don't think that's the case at all. So I think that they cheated is what they did. And I think it's in several states. The MAGA candidates did have
But it
the
all
better
goes
polling.
together.
Yeah.
What I mean is, you donate to the MAGA candidate so they win their primary. So then that justifies, anybody MAGA is a fascist, therefore it justifies our cheating in the election. Mm-hmm. Because there's something, you got to tell the campaign worker and the poll watcher a story that inspires them to, on some level, risk criminal charges.
Yeah.
And if it's like, look, we're stopping Hitler here,
Yeah.
people will do it.
Speaking of Hitler,
Yeah.
you got in your notes Nuremberg. I put in my
Speaking of
notes
Hitler,
Nuremberg.
Nuremberg too.
Only because I'm wondering what you're going to say, and so I have a thought depending on where you go with it. So what's your thought? Will it happen, you ask?
Yeah, so what I want, and this has trended on Twitter numerous times, and what a lot of people are calling for, and I'm with them, is a Nuremberg 2, a trial for their lives.
Oh, trials.
For the people
okay.
who held back genuine therapeutic options against COVID that would then caused so many deaths.
Broke the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, it's a genocide. It's a targeted
Yeah.
killing so that they could make, the untold billions of
New
dollars.
York Governor Cuomo sends these people back to retirement homes
Yeah.
and wipes them out.
And how does Nuremberg trial end? It ends at the gallows. It ends, right? It ends with real consequences.
I did not think that's where you're going to go with this. When you say, well, it happened, I say a resounding no.
I think part of what makes this presidential election so important is whether it does or not.
Yeah.
I think DeSantis could make it happen.
I don't think so.
Because one of the things I've realized is that the House, right, they love to have their little hearings to get on TV and sit on their high chairs and spout off about whatever witness comes before them, right? Mark Zuckerberg has to come in and defend, blah, blah, blah. But nothing happens.
That's my point.
It means
nothing happens. It all is posturing from the right.
Right. So that's why
media time.
Law enforcement is an executive function. It has to be the executive branch. It has to be an actual federal indictments,
I don't
arrests.
agree. And here's why I still don't agree. What's his name? Not Bill Barr, but the guy he appointed, Durham.
Yeah.
He could not get a conviction, and he basically gave up convictions.
But who does Durham report
Smith,
to? He reports to the House to impeach.
No, he reports to the Department of Justice, which is a presidential.
Yeah, but what?
Branch.
Okay, so that's Biden's Department of Justice, which means nothing.
I understand, but
that's why it's the executive branch.
Well, but wait a minute, because it was a special counsel,
Yeah.
he was alleviated from. He was not corralled by those above him. That's the whole point of special counsel.
Right.
Supposedly somebody who doesn't have to answer. I mean, they are ultimately in this chain of command, but because this case is going on, et cetera, they can take it where it goes.
Right.
He could not get a conviction. Kleinsmith completely lied, and it was all, he could not get a conviction.
Okay,
for
explain
people who
Kleinsmith and what you're saying.
Well, these are the attorneys. This is back with the Russiagate stuff. I'm talking Comey. I'm talking Kleinsmith. I'm talking
so these are
Stroke. I'm talking, Comey and the guy before him, they lied. Clapper, they literally lied to Congress, which is a federal offense.
right.
And there's nothing that happens. It is not an environment in which the right is capable of bringing to justice misdeeds.
Are they capable or are they willing?
Well, both. I think they're unwilling because they find themselves incapable. They're not, there's not convicting.
And I think capacity follows will. If where there's a will,
I agree.
In Washington, D.C., there's a way.
But
that
Durham
will,
had a will, and it did not work.
I don't think he did, honestly.
He brought them into court, and they were not guilty. The evidence is plain as day. Carrie Lake, the evidence is plain as day.
I'm not talking about Durham's will. I'm talking about the will of the people.
Well, I agree with you there.
If people are clamoring for it, it will happen.
Well, yes, I agree, but I think all these representatives in Congress, which is where this has to start, these kinds of things, they look at what Durham does and what Carrie Lake, what happens to her, and they say, that's a suicide mission.
Yeah.
That's political suicide. Therefore, I don't have the will.
Correct.
And I think, so where I think you and I find agreement is the will ultimately comes back to the American people, which is what you're saying.
It's on
and
us.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
We don't have the will to prosecute and say you're guilty, which is why you can walk around in California and steal $700 because there's every day, at least $700
per incident.
Per day, yeah.
Yeah. Well, per location.
So, is it per location?
Why not?
I thought it was per day. But
700 this store,
the
700
point is,
that store.
that's the will of our people day. And I think really if we're talking about on second thought, what that gets to is we don't know how to say right and wrong. We discarded biblical definitions for sin and righteousness. What is good as it relates to a divine being, and what is bad as it relates to a divine being. And when we let go of that, we lost the capacity for me to have the ability to say, all I can say is you live your truth, Luke. If you want to steal $700, I sure don't want to teach my kids that, but you're free because I can't say you're a thief and you should go to jail.
I think what I've heard people say who sympathize with crime and vote for these district attorneys to let things slide is not quite that. It's actually that I just feel so bad for those people
I know, I agree
committing
with
the
you.
crimes.
I'm going underneath what they're not saying, which is
Yeah.
what I think is the underlying issue. But I agree with you at
But
that
it's
level.
also
It's
those-
an equitable social issue.
Those people resist God in his judgment and his authority,
Yeah.
and therefore they vote for laws that create a lack of authority, a real
Yes, that's
consequence.
right.
Yeah.
And they have a distortion of what it means to be compassionate, what it means to be merciful.
Because you can't
gets
really love
distorted.
without authority. You
That's
just
correct.
can't.
I agree with you there. Okay, I did not think you were going there with the Nuremberg. I thought you were going, I knew that was the trials was an issue, but Nuremberg was also the place passed before the Jewish laws where you had to register as Jewish people. And if you had 3 grandparents, then you were kicked out of Germany, a bunch of them killed. If you had 2 grandparents or less, and you could prove it, and so this whole thing about what it meant to be Jewish,
Yeah.
and then it included Asian people and black people. I
I've
thought
never
you were
heard this
going
story.
there.
Yeah, I didn't know
that's
about
the
that.
roots of Nuremberg before the trials.
Yeah.
That's where the laws were passed in Germany. And I was going to say, will it happen? It already is.
As far as with respect to Christian.
Christian and a little bit of whiteness.
Oh, yeah.
There is the statement that is, you are safe to say to ridicule white people.
Yeah.
You're safe to accuse. You won't be harmed. And so if there's a mass murder, if somebody shoots a bunch of people, if they shoot 5 people, if they're white, it'll make the news. If they're black, it'll get covered up.
So I've been
Or
saying this
Asian.
since Obama, this is how you create white supremacists.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's a point, and it's growing in my circles. I'm seeing people sort of like, yeah, I guess, to a lot of this stuff where it's like, we need to have pride in being white because we're under attack.
I know, you're right.
And everybody's
It creates
allowed to
a
be proud of
distortion.
being Asian. Everybody's allowed to be proud of being black. Why can't we be proud of being white? Why
know.
can't we try to
I know.
create all white communities?
I know.
I mean, I think it was a New York Times article saying we need to have black majority city or states.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, why can't we swap that out? And that creates
Yeah.
what they say they're against.
Yeah.
And it's been going on even before 2020. I remember having these conversations about the effect of Obama.
Yeah.
Because Obama made everything that you were against him meant you were probably racist. The only reason you don't like him, because obviously it couldn't be his values. It couldn't be his actual, laws he wants to pass or the way he undermines religious freedom.
Yeah.
It must be that you just don't like black people.
Yeah. Okay. J.C. Ryle, moving on. J.C. Ryle.
Yeah, so a friend sent me a great sermon.
All right, but before we do that, we just want to make one comment here.
Okay.
We're going to try to start recommending some things here and there.
Yeah.
And
You
we're
wanted to
gonna start with
recommend the Bible Project? Are we going to get to
We
that
did
one?
that. Didn't we do that one
I don't
already?
know.
I
We
think
had it on the
did that
notes
one.
for a long time. I don't know if we ever
We
said
said it, I think.
Okay.
Today I was going to do Tolkien. An article on fairy tales. If you think fairy tales are for kids, or if you think have you read his article on fairy tales?
No, you told me about it though.
It is outstanding, and it is an intellectual defense of why fairy tales grab the popular imagination.
So I have been reading some George MacDonald fairy tales actually.
Yes.
We have a couple of his books in our curriculum
Back
for high
in the North
schoolers.
Wind.
Yeah. So make
Anyway,
this defense.
I'm not
fairy
going to make the
tales.
defense. I'll make one point he says just to whet the appetite.
Okay.
On fairy tales, it's an essay. It's probably 30 pages. It's longer, but it is an adult defense. Anyway, one of the great things he says near the end of it is he talks about eucatastrophe, a catastrophe against kata, but by adding the u, and he made up this word eucatastrophe, and basically he's revamping Chesterton's thing on all stories from Genesis 1 through 3. All story finds its root in Genesis 1 through 3.
All right.
And the end of Genesis 3 is there's a hope of redemption. That there's a seed that will come and will crush this, and et cetera, et cetera.
Wait, is Cain and Abel's
Genesis
chapter 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But the end of 3 is the hope. There's skin sown and there's a promise.
Yeah. The seed of the woman.
The seed of the woman, and he'll bite your heel, but you'll crush his head. This kind of. So there's an announced victory that's coming.
Yeah.
And it works itself way out through human history until we find ourselves today with an understanding of what that is in terms of Jesus. But eucatastrophe, and he says the land of fairy and fairy tales are all eucatastrophes. They are the long promised coming of good in the face of overwhelming evil. And
Okay.
so anyway, that's all I'm going
So
to say.
what's the difference between a fairy tale and a
Subscribe.
superhero movie?
Um,
Because that feels like something similar.
yeah. Well, traditionally, fairy tales or the land of fairy is not something within our native world. So it is another dimension of life
The
or a realm of
multiverse.
existence, not necessarily the multiverse.
So here's what strikes me. In a fairy tale, the hero is a regular person against supernatural odds or opponents.
Sometimes, not necessarily.
Versus a superhero movie is someone endowed with superior skill or
So we should
power.
make a distinction between a fairy tale and a fairy, the land of fairy. Not
Okay, right.
fairies miniature. It is a supernatural realm in which people go into at their peril because it's not made for them anymore. It's like an underworld in that we can't go down there and breathe water with the man from Atlantis, so to speak.
Okay.
But it's not that. It's different things. So it's not so much a set in our world. Our world engages with the land of fairy, but we're basically cut off. What I personally think fairy is the appeal of Eden, of lost Eden, that we have native to our humanity a desire for paradise, and we can't get to it. And we look out at the hills and the oceans and the sky, and they're beautiful, and the stars. This is the land of fairy. Fairy deals with this world as if there's no fall. And
So
we hunger for that, but we can't get to it. We're distant.
I heard somebody argue. I was reading an old Watchman Nee book, who's a Chinese
Yeah,
Christian
yeah.
pastor and missionary, and he made the argument that within Eden is not just idyllic creation, like you might think of when you go to a pristine mountain lake, right? But rather that there was a higher ability within man in that time. And his argument in that was that Adam was given the job to conquer the world.
Yes.
So how could one man conquer such a vast planet
Yeah.
if he didn't have abilities beyond our reckoning?
I agree with that. And that's where the superheroes come in. And that I think does tap into this sense that we're not able to do the things that we think we should be able to do. And so we create stories about those who can.
So what his argument was is that witchcraft and the occult or just other religions such as Buddhism or Hinduism, their practices are all basically designed to try to bring out the latent abilities of Adam
Yes.
that are
That's actually
suppressed
what I
by
think,
corrupt
too.
flesh.
But my caveat to that is, but God says don't do it.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well, in
that
sort
you-
of, because the Bible clearly does say to suppress your corrupt flesh. And you'll see very similar practices such as fasting or different types of meditative prayer present in other religions.
But it also says things like don't deal with mediums or spirits.
Correct.
Don't try to get the information perhaps you could have gotten if you had not fallen.
Yeah.
You could have accessed certain ways of knowing the world, but the fall has made it to where those are bad for you. Don't do them. And so I actually fall in the line we're saying, I think there is legitimate information that can be gotten through those avenues, but God says don't go there. It's
Yeah.
only going to hurt you.
Well, so to the degree that your practices are designed to bring up abilities, right, to divine,
Yes.
right,
yeah,
the future,
yeah,
to act, I agree completely.
yeah.
But I think there's a suppressing of the flesh and a unity with the Spirit of God that looks very similar.
I agree with you. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. So ESP,
And the Bible calls them
self-healing.
the Bible calls them gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah,
The Spirit of God, clearly.
yeah, yeah.
But I think there are other spirits who bring other gifts.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
necessarily agree with him though that the supernatural abilities of who we think of as like the great men of old or superheroes, I don't think they're just latent in all of us and we could access them if only. I think there is a secondary spiritual being, either the Spirit of God and his holy angels or those fallen angels and corrupt spirits that want to draw people away from the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think they're latent. That's my conclusion.
You think it's both?
Yeah, I do.
Interesting.
All right, J.C. Ryle, what do you got?
Okay, so a friend of mine sent me a sermon, and it was really just focused on the love of God. That God is love, what that means, what it's about. And part of what I took from it, and this is a friend of mine who I would describe his faith as like really pure. in the sense that I find what I end up doing, sometimes for good and sometimes not, is overcomplicating everything, right? And I felt like when I was listening to this sermon, it was like an antidote to that. It was just, you don't realize how loving the love is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And as I listened, I realized this pastor was inviting me to worship God in a purer way than saying, because what I tend to do is say, okay, what does love mean? And let's categorize it and let's think about circumstances and applications. And he's saying, no, just look at it. And I thought, man,
Be drenched.
I feel like we're missing that. Or at least I am. And I find myself in the pulpit more
Yeah.
often than
Yeah.
most people.
Yeah.
And so I'm leading other people to do the same
Yeah.
thing I do, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Like, what if we just stopped and said, he's holy?
Yeah.
And you don't know what it means. And I think that is what the Bible, especially in the Psalms and even elsewhere, is calling you to meditate, meaning to look at it and just look and worship because of who he is. So I find myself, and even in our conversations, right, we're not spending a lot of time saying,
No. Yeah.
but in my upbringing in Pentecostal churches, and they'll sing a song,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the whole song is like 4 lines, and we'll sing it for 20 minutes.
They're fine to repeat. Yeah.
Yeah, but part of what that is,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of self-hypnosis in there.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
little bit of
yeah.
like, if I only work hard enough, God will hear me, which isn't how the Bible, he's not that way. He hears you. But there's also that worshipful purity of just
Yeah.
saying, no, I just want
agree.
to see, man, there's a couple songs, whenever they come on, it stirs something in me.
Yeah.
And lately, those types of songs are all about seeing him in heaven. That his eyes are like flames of fire and that his hair is white as wool. Just these little details that stop me in my tracks to think, it's not just the truth. It's a person, right? It's not being right.
Yeah.
It's being with the one who is right.
Yeah. So do you feel like you've ever preached in that spirit?
I think I scratch at it, but I've never said this is what I'm about, right? This sermon is about that.
Well, so I think that has happened to me a time or two. It is also impossible to make happen. So there are, I think in the verse where Jeremiah is told to eat this scroll, right?
Yeah.
And
this is
it
in a
delicious.
vision
Yeah.
where God is teaching him how to prophesy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's giving him his word,
Yeah, right.
and he eats it, and it moves him. It moves him.
Yeah,
Then it turns bitter,
right.
right?
And once he's eaten it, it was sweet.
Yeah,
Going
sweet
down.
bitter, but it has to come up, almost like he's going to throw up again. What I take that to mean is when you are, let's say you're going, because I think you're right. What God was saying is, Jeremiah, here's something I'm going to give you, and I want you to give it to my people.
Right.
That process is a difficult one,
Yeah.
because going down, it's sweet, and you think, I'm going to go give it to your people.
When God gives it to you, it's wonderful.
Yes.
But then you
Getting
gotta
it
go
back
give it out.
is so hard. So I heard a guy use an illustration. It's a little morbid, but he says sermons that are stillborn.
Wow. Yeah.
You've gestated them, they're living, and you get up there and they die. It's not your words. It's not even your experience.
And God had a lot to say about that it's not on you. That's on them.
There's truth in that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's on you. I've preached where I was more clever than I was prayerful.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a genuine God spoke and told you to say it, and they didn't want it.
No, I'm thinking, I think I have stopped up God speaking by being clever.
No,
When
I'm
I
not disagreeing with
experienced
that.
him- Yeah.
What I'm saying is, what you were first describing is it's sweet going down and bitter on the way back. Is not you got in the way. It's not like if only I had done it right, it would have been sweet.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever sweet coming back. The whole thing is that it's not at all. It has to come out. But in the coming out, it doesn't always become a worshipful event.
Right.
And that is, I think what you're talking about is a real thing. I think it is the aim of every sermon. This is how I viewed it. It's the aim of every sermon. And it was...
but it's unpredictable when it's going to actually...
And it doesn't happen nearly as much as you want.
And that's where humility is so important
It is
from
humility.
the pulpit.
And yet, you know what's the funniest thing about that? Because I'm going to transition here to the pastoral emphasis. What's so interesting about that is I've preached sermons where I felt like the Lord was with me. And people can say, I've preached some where people said things and it was clear and they confirmed it. I preached others where there wasn't a ton of feedback. I preached some where I thought I was discouraged on the steps going down. I mean, and then people start saying things. And it's like,
Your own,
look at the Lord, say, that's so stupid.
your own impression of the quality of your sermon is not reliable.
No, it is not
I agree.
reliable at all.
Yeah.
In fact, it's reliable almost in its majority flip-flopped.
But here's the other side of that. I don't even think people's feedback is reliable.
That's true.
Because you can very clearly, even with Jesus, see that he had certain
That's
sermons
true.
to preach that we're gonna cull the herd here a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
yeah.
preach a tough one,
Yeah.
and about half of them are gonna leave.
Yeah,
Let's get ready, and then we'll
And
do it.
he had people responding to him, and he said, one passage says he did not commit himself because he knew what was in the heart of men.
Because part of the rebukes of a false teacher is that they're just telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah. I
If
know.
we're just chasing that positive feedback, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Ongoing discussions. I wanted to bring up something you said. The pastoral emphasis here is in my notes.
Okay.
Now, you made a statement, I think it was our last one, and I agreed with it in its context, but I disagreed with it in its larger. And I
Okay.
didn't know which one you meant.
Now I'm
We were
interested.
talking about going down to the front, the altar.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the pastor, it's not his job, he's down there to deal with God, not a prayer team, da-da.
Yeah.
And then you said something along the lines of, so, hey, I'm heading home, we'll see you, we'll leave it open
There was
for
a
you.
story I heard somebody
Yeah.
relayed about during the great
And
Second
I
Great
don't
Awakening.
disagree with that in terms of the altar and going down. Prayer teams, I have a mixed feeling about them because you are wanting to call the people down. And in the older format, so to speak, it was a generally understood sense you were calling them down to meet God,
Right.
right? And I agree with you. That doesn't mean to meet the pastor or the prayer team.
Yeah.
But then I got thinking about that in general statement. When you said that, I thought, so I don't agree with that in terms of the pastoral emphasis. I think what we have is a large neglect of pastoral care by pastors, that the CEO model is the reigning model. The person who's the leader,
Everything gets delegated. Is that what you're saying?
not just delegated, because it doesn't have to be delegated, but the running of things
Right.
is the primary call. So I was thinking about this since we last had our thing, and I was thinking about the three words for pastor is shepherd, or it's connected to the word sheep, and that's where we get pastor from.
Right.
Then there's
pasture.
overseer, which is episkopos, and that is a leader. Well, let's just leave it at that. There's a leader, but it's a little more than that, but it's a leader. Epi is over, and skopos is focusing in on what's necessary to have happen.
Okay.
And so it's doing that over the care of this body. And then the third one is elder, presbyter. Well, the least free, and those all three mean the same things. There's several verses in Scripture that they're used
They
interchangeably.
interchange it to speak of the same role.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they don't have different emphases in that of
Right.
what they're talking about. That's what my view is. So it's the same thing, but they call out different aspects. So I do think there's a very clear leading that pastor to be leaders of this organization. That's the episkopos word.
Right.
But that's, I think, the bottom one. The top one is they're to be the old men that have lived godly lives, have turned to godly lives, and they have experience, and they're not going to be rash as they help. They're elders.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
older.
They're men of wisdom.
They're men of wisdom under God's rule, not just wisdom, right? So it's just not you're an older guy and you should be on the elder board.
Yeah.
No, it's spiritually mindedness, but it is by experience and trial and error, and you've learned to live in the gospel.
Yeah.
That's the big one. It's the middle one, that the shepherding. And so when we took that shepherding and leading aspect, I felt like your comment, I didn't know if you meant this or not, because you and I are wired differently too, because I
Yeah.
think you think more about leading and I think more about shepherding.
Right.
But I wanted to make the case, and see how you heard it, is that actually I agreed with you on the going down to the altar, but if you pull away from that particular, I think pastors are supposed to be engaged with the people, constantly. They're not supposed to
yes.
leave them.
Well, and that
A
made me
shepherd
think
doesn't
about
leave sheep.
the role of priest in the temple and the role of a prayer minister or someone at the altar to meet someone coming down are very similar in my view. And that is, I'm here to show you the right way to offer this sacrifice. But it's still your sacrifice to offer.
I agree with you. You can't.
And what I've seen in my experience, and it's limited, right? But in the handful of churches that I've committed to in my life, the most common weakness in pastoral leadership is usually a desire to control everything.
That's totally true.
And that when things go wrong, the
true.
pastor says, it's my fault. If only I had done this more.
Yeah.
Right? And when things go right, man, I'm doing great, you know?
Yeah.
And that intertwining of ego and
yeah.
spiritual wholeness, or at least a perception
I
of it.
agree with you on this.
And I it's poisonous to the men who fill that role.
I agree with you.
And it takes an incredibly stout heart to avoid that impulse to control.
Yeah. I agree
And
with that.
I'm constantly impressed with our pastor and his ability to say, yeah, go for it. Like to be hands off, you know, and he would say probably too much.
Well,
and,
so I didn't want you to go in somebody you and I knew, because then I can't push back, right? Because then
I could trap you.
yeah.
But I think there's a balance that we're trying to strive for in a church, and usually that balance is found among a plurality of men. That you're not going to find one guy to be that model, and I think that's where that dynamic of a plurality of elders is so vital. But yeah, so in what I'm saying, I think I'm agreeing with you, is to say you do need someone down there. So when I've been on a prayer team as an adult, right, I was trained to do it as a young man, and I don't know that I would train someone today to do it the way that I was. But what I've done recently is say, I'm going to come down beside you and say, what's God doing?
Yes, that's right.
And if it's like they're weeping over their sin, keep going, right?
Yeah.
If it's like I'm trapped in my sin and I'm crying out, let me help you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And let's pray through it. Let's look at symptoms. Let's spiritually.
It took me a long time. I have a funny story. I think I can tell it all. I'm meeting with a person. This person was a woman, and she had been involved with a lot of crazy things.
Okay.
She'd been a white witch.
Oh.
She had been a dominatrix. She had, well, let's just leave those two examples, right?
Two
pretty
forms of witchcraft, let's say.
Yeah. And so I'm meeting with her, and she has recently become a Christian.
Yeah.
And she wants to learn. She wants to meet. She doesn't know she wants to learn. She does. That's why she's meeting.
Yeah.
And it was my first one when I started to realize, because as soon as she's telling her story, 30 minutes in, I'm getting the story, I'm taking notes. It's like, oh my goodness, I've got a long list of things to deal with here, right?
Yeah.
But I realized as I listened to her, none of those were really the thing God was doing.
There you go.
It was something else. And in my mind, it was way down the list, right, of level of importance.
Right.
But I had learned by that point to say it's this pastoral care is not hear your story and then I'm going to pick out the things, I'm going to make my order and start at the biggest one.
Right. Well, and that's the CEO impulse, right? Is to say, we got our checklist,
right.
let's get it out. This is how we do these kind of meetings.
That's right. Yeah. Biggest bang for the buck.
So did you see success
with
her
that
story?
Individual? Yes. It was a very good experience in that I was able to meet her where I sensed God was, and that's where, and it stirred the story when you said, what's God doing?
Yeah.
And I learned from that, that's my primary question, to look for what is God doing. I'm still writing everything down. I still have to use my assessment and judgment.
Right.
But then I'm asking the next question is, Lord, where does it look like your finger is touching on?
Well, because
on this list.
God is the spirit of wisdom.
It is.
And I feel like when you get too much into that feelings chasing, right, and lose wisdom, you're in trouble. But at the same time, if it's all system, and no.
When I became a Christian, I went to Corbin Western Baptist, and to me, and a lot of people got mad at me when I transferred in. A lot of people in the dorm, the RAs.
Wait, when you transferred to Corbin,
they were mad at me. I had loud music. It was the worst of the music. I had a super fast car. I had a terrible attitude.
Tell me about this car, just so I can know.
It was an IROC.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a great
It was
car.
Dwight's car.
No, it was double Dwight's car. I had pride oozing out of every pore. Okay. And so the people were responding to that. And well, the problem is none of those things, I had just become a Christian. I was trying to not cuss, not do drugs,
The biggest.
and not sleep with anybody. That's
Right.
it.
But all
that
they could
was the
see,
battlefront.
all they could see was the car,
All
the
those
loud
other
music.
things.
Yeah.
And they were all issues.
Yeah.
But they weren't on my radar at all. I didn't know why these
And
people...
nor could you have handled it if they were, right?
Yeah. It took a year before I started thinking, man, this music is probably not helpful to me.
So this brings me to that Richmond, north of Richmond again. And the idea of the criticism that got from a lot of Christian leaders, I wouldn't say a ton, but significant,
Yes.
was like,
It's
oh,
very
I
similar.
would love this song if it weren't for the cuss words.
Yeah.
And it's like he's calling out that God would judge the wicked who are overwhelmingly
Yeah.
harming the poor and the needy. It's like the heartbeat of God throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
And you're worried because he said God damn in it. And it's like, well, you know what?
Did he say that?
Oh, yeah.
I did
And
not
more.
hear- Did he say that as a combined single swear word?
I hope so.
I did not hear that.
Because-
it's one
because-
thing if you separate it, God damn something, because that's quite different than,
Well, there are some things that need to be damned.
yeah. Yes,
I
that's
think-
what I mean.
and so-
if you separate them and have a verb and a subject,
No. If I'm describing oppression of the weak and the act of oppressing those weak people or those needy people is a goddamn thing that needs to be condemned.
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I hear you. I'm uncomfortable with that one. I want a pause between it because then
I'm not describing it. I'm not praying, God, please damn that.
Right.
Those people or that action.
Yeah,
I'm describing the thing itself
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
thing that
I
is
know,
damned
I
by
hear
God.
you.
It's a goddamn thing.
Yes, I hear you.
Like I'm literally saying it.
Yes.
It's just like saying for God's sake.
But you are saying two words when you say that.
Well-
for God's sake is three words.
Okay.
And when you said the other one, you were using them as a double-worded statement.
Okay.
God is the subject, and then damn is the action,
Right.
right? That's not the same thing when people use it as a swear word.
But the point I'm making though is they're straining the gnat to swallow
I
the camel.
agree with you. I agree
And they're
with you.
saying, well, this guy, he said, I don't want the $8 million music
Yeah,
contract.
I know.
He said, I'm just writing these songs to deal with my depression.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find God.
Do you
And
have,
it's like, you're going to go and criticize the language. It's the same thing you're saying.
I know.
This
you're right.
guy's just, but he's speaking the truth and he's
Do
calling
you
on
have
God.
any theology or development of a theology of swearing?
I don't know if it's
We're
a
off topic
theology.
here.
I mean, Jesus said
Well,
raka.
Thoughts under the submission to God.
So Jesus in his
Theology,
sermon,
a study of what
Sermon on the
God-
Mount, right? He says, if you say the word raka, you're going to get judged by the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he said it.
Okay.
So this word that was unspeakable, he's openly
Yes.
using in a
Yeah,
sermon.
yeah.
So there's some precedent.
Yeah. Anything
Is it
else?
unwholesome? The call to prophecy is the call against or to condemn things that are unholy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had this conversation with kids today. Was what is swearing and why do adults get so worked up about it? Because kids
Mm-hmm.
don't, and they swear all the time.
Well, we're in a different culture than we used to be in.
Well, but part of what I said is, it's like crying wolf. When you cuss all the time, no one listens to you anymore.
Yes.
Because you don't have any words in reserve to say,
Yeah,
no, now it really
yes.
matters.
So that's a part of my theology of swearing is that they are appropriate words for certain occasions.
Yeah.
And that what swearing is making them vain, popularizing them so they no longer carry the weight that
Yeah.
they were intended to carry.
I listened to a news article. It was an NPR story talking about, I think it was either Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, one of the two, probably Dostoevsky in one of his novels. And they were talking about how English translations don't catch how severe some of his language use was. And it was shocking to the audience, the Russian audience. And then the two, liberal NPR hosts say, man, it's too bad we don't have words for that. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's because we ruined them. By saying the F word for everything, you
Yes,
have no word
that's
in
right.
reserve.
That's right.
It's like you shot all your bullets and now everybody thinks you got a BB
exactly
gun.
right. Yep.
Yeah, what we used to tell the boys, I asked them, I said, do you guys get in trouble for swear words? And they were like, oh yeah. And I thought, no, you don't. Not like I did, right?
You're asking them, teacher, if you get in trouble with your parent, of which you are the parent.
And I'm sitting there, right? Yeah. And so my boys, I was curious their answer. But what I did tell them, and this happens all the time, right? They don't remember what I said when they were 5. But what I would say is that's a really serious word. Are you trying to say something really serious?
Yes, that's right.
And if you're not, you shouldn't use that word.
Yeah.
Because that's an important word.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of almost everything.
Philippians 3 has the famous word scubala, which is translated dung.
Is this the dung?
In the old King James, refuse, some of it. But the reality of that word, it is a New Testament word, and there's been scholars that have shown this. It's both human and animal shit.
Excrement. Yeah. Full on.
It's not just excrement. That's what we
the
prefer
proper
that
word.
one. Yeah. But it is a word that was on the edge of society, that was an improper, impolite word to say.
Yeah.
And Paul uses it in this description about his own righteousness within the law's framework without Jesus. And he says it's scubala.
Yeah.
And everything that accrues to righteous for me is scubala. I personally believe he throws an off-color word with intentionality.
To shock.
And it is to shock. Just saying, you guys, it's very difficult to understand the role of self-righteousness in the Christian's heart and the non-Christian's heart. But even as the church, self-righteousness is the biggest killer in churches of anything, because it basically turns your Christian behavior into now your acceptance with God.
And this is what you were talking about last time about Christian culture. When Christian culture goes wrong,
exactly right.
It's this pious protection of anything.
It is the most discussed, and the world hates it.
Yeah.
And they should.
Yeah, right.
We don't see it, and we then become judgmental.
Right.
But anyway, part of my theology of swearing is that there is a legitimate occasions that warrant it.
Correct. Yeah.
And so
I think that's the difference.
it doesn't bother me, for example, a war movie in particular, or JFK. Did we talk about JFK in the movie ever?
A little bit, I think.
The 90 ones? I thought we
Yeah.
did. But
I did a report in 7th grade social studies on that movie.
It's such an interesting movie. But there's a lot of swearing in it. Pesky's character swears a lot. Pesci. But it doesn't bother me at all, man, because he's so stressed out.
So here's what I noticed about that movie, right? And this is as a middle schooler, okay?
Yeah.
Because my mom at the time said the same thing, that there's a lot of swearing in that movie, but it felt real.
Yeah.
It didn't bother her,
That was the
right?
same with me.
And so in that same era was like, and I don't know how close together, it'd be interesting to look back, was like Boys in the Hood. Remember that movie?
I do.
And I loved that movie as a high schooler. I thought this thing is amazing.
Yeah.
Because I had no insight into what it's like to grow up in
Yeah.
inner city LA.
Yeah.
And I felt like I got a window.
Yeah.
It's a movie.
It
but
was not gratuitous either. There was a lot of swearing, but it was a part of the culture rather than gratuitous.
But I remember adults in my life, it might have been my mom, it might have been people, I don't know, elsewhere, saying about that movie, it's too much. And I remember thinking, oh, it's like, is there a culture? Like, that's not my culture, and I look down on it kind of thing.
Yeah. I agree.
Early white privilege, maybe, right?
All right, so the pastoral, that was my only thing. One more.
The
How about
pastoral
this?
emphasis. Okay.
Yeah, the pastoral emphasis. One more ongoing topic. Are
Okay.
emotions neutral?
Yeah, so
right.
I brought this up.
We're near our time here, so this is our closing out conversation.
Well, it dovetails with the question you said was like desires are neutral. That there's not a moral or immoral desire, but rather that the desire becomes corrupted by some kind of immorality. And I think that in the same way, emotions aren't moral or immoral, but what we do with them, right, can lead to.
So I hear that argument, and I like it.
Yeah.
The problem I have, because it's like guns. Are guns killers? No.
Okay. Yeah.
Guns are neutral.
Yeah.
It is the person holding the gun, pulling the trigger. That's the problem. It is not guns. And so I hear you saying a similar thing about emotions. Emotions are neutral. What you do with them.
Well, and even more, they're a symptom. And I think you could do that with guns. You could say if there's a lot of shootings going on, it's a symptom of a dysfunctional society, right? I heard lots of rednecks say back in my day, kids go to high school with a gun in the rack, in their pickup truck, and nobody bats an eye.
Yeah, that's right.
Someone's going to steal that gun if you do that today.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a safe place anymore, no matter how small town you are.
So the gun, in a sense, is more dangerous, not because it is any different,
because
but
we're
the
more
culture
dangerous.
is different. Yeah.
And that's where you get tyranny, and we're going way off the rail here.
Yeah.
But the reason tyrants come into power is that we want them to, because we're afraid of our neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
or ourselves. We don't want to have self-government anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so my thinking is that the emotions are not neutral. And what drives that, I like where you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be where I'd be inclined to think, except that what about Scripture that says it has elements of emotions and says, don't do this. So
Fear is the main one, right?
fear is one.
Yeah.
There's anger. There is the thing, angry
So-
and don't sin.
Yeah.
But there's also don't be angry or wrathful and these
Slow
I
to
know-
anger.
Yeah,
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Right.
I think even lust, if you were going back to the Sermon on the Mount and whatnot, there are feelings.
Would you describe that as an emotion, or
I
we're going
know,
to
I
desires
know,
a little bit?
I know.
Well, but there's
But
a
does
sexual.
your argument rest on a distinction there?
I make a distinction just naturally. I've never thought of them as being the same thing at all. Like sexual desire is not sinful, but
Right.
what you do with it is
Right.
can very quickly become sinful.
Right. Well, no, not just that. That's not accurate. And
Okay.
Jesus says, don't lust after women. You have already committed adultery and you didn't do anything.
Right. Well, we're playing with definitions a little bit. So what I would never call the sexual desire lust unless it's met with an immoral outlet and a fantasy behind it, right? That you're imagining, you're creating a story that is the precursor to immorality. So I could not, by my definition of lust, which I think holds some, like I've read about it, I could never lust after my wife, even though I could desire her intensely.
See, I'm not sure if I'm there on that. And the thing that keeps me there is the Galatians passage, which says that the spirit lusts against the flesh. It's the exact same word.
Okay.
Epithumia, strong desire,
Yeah.
is what the word is in original. And so that the word lust is used negatively and the word lust is used positively. I'm kind of
the
back
spirit lusts for what again? In the
for
Galatians?
the spirit lusts for the fruit of the spirit, really.
Okay.
And it lusts against the flesh. And so in that passage, then you have here's its fruit and here's the
It
flesh's
longs
fruit.
deeply for a positive.
It desires,
Yeah.
intensely feels,
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
But now I'm actually flipping on your side there and saying the desire is neutral because
Yeah.
it can be used positive or negative. But and so I wouldn't want to get. I'm just thinking, why does the Scripture say certain emotions? It says don't do that.
Yeah. Well, the way I frame it, and I think I preached this a couple weeks ago, was that emotions are the outcome of belief, particularly fear. And fear is the beginning of a lot of emotions. Because once you're afraid, then you get angry to defend yourself against the thing that you're afraid of, right?
Right.
Or you're sad that the thing will happen, so you're afraid that sadness will come back, right? And so, when God calls us not to fear, it's because He's imploring us to trust Him. So the fear is the symptom that you need to hunt it. Like, oh, I felt a fear.
Yeah.
Where
But
am I
feel
not
like
trusting God?
That is not. I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but I feel like you're pushing the argument just further back. So we can put fear at the bottom of a lot of emotions that are unhealthy. I
Well,
agree with you.
Part of what I'm trying to do is say the emotions are not I don't think it's productive, I think is the right word, to feel guilt around some emotion. To
Okay.
add guilt to an
So
emotion.
let's use your fear thing. Let's say a person has a difficult thing that happens in their life, which I have one going on right now, and you know about it.
Yeah.
But so it can create fear, right?
Yeah.
But the thing I'm most interacting with might be feeling sorry for myself. Let's say
right,
I would say
right.
that's a feeling, an emotion, and it's unhealthy.
It's like a self-righteous sorrow.
Something is behind it, and if I dug behind it, there is fear. There is probably self-righteousness. There could
Yeah.
be a few strands, roots underneath it that are really what feeds this.
Yeah.
But what I'm interacting with is self-pity, feelings, and I think that is not a neutral interaction.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why I'm wondering. I mean, I would prefer your idea about emotions that they're neutral,
Yeah.
but I feel like Scripture says, well, don't do certain things, and they're emotions. Don't do this. Now, maybe
Yeah.
it says only don't do them in the bad way, but there's a good way, like lust. Don't lust about this
Women who aren't your
thing,
wife.
Yep.
Right.
But strongly desire, that's what the word lust means.
Yeah.
This, which is legitimate. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and that's what I've always attributed is to say, here's why I don't, even though God clearly says, do not fear many, many times, right? What I think of in that is adding guilt to my fear doesn't resolve the fear. I've got to figure out what's making me afraid so that I won't feel it. Because, and fear is a good example. I think I've told you the shark story when I was swimming in the ocean in Hawaii. And, you know, when I went to Hawaii, it was about 10 years ago, and it was like all I wanted to do was be in the ocean. I was so excited. So I'm out in the ocean by myself, which is probably not the safest thing to do. I'm wearing a weight belt so that I can swim deeper. Probably not the wisest thing to do, right?
Sure.
I'm swimming out there probably 200 yards offshore. No one's coming for me. No one's going to help me. And I'm looking down intently at the bottom, thinking about where I'm going to go next to go down there.
Shadow over you.
And I just happen to look up. I see something like out of my peripheral. I look up, and nose toward me about 30 yards away is this big, 3 feet wide shark.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's
instantly
distressing.
my body had a reaction that I've never experienced
Yeah.
outside of that moment of like every muscle convulsed, right? I saw nothing but that thing for that instant. It was like all the classic panic. And then at a second glance, it was a turtle. It was coming right for me.
Oh,
But it was that shape,
Okay,
the fins
okay,
going out the
okay,
side, and it was nose
okay.
toward me.
so let's take
So
that.
for
you
half
had
a second,
yeah.
I had unrivaled, uncontrollable fear.
Yeah.
To stop and say how I should be ashamed, but rather to say, oh, it's what I
Okay, so wait a minute.
believed
I hear
created
you on
that
that.
fear.
Is there a difference between feelings that are spontaneous or outside of your mental faculties of reason or control or deliberation?
I think
and another set of feelings that pass through those.
I think they are all in the first category. That's what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, see, I don't think that. So I think my self-pity, for example, it's not that I've thought to myself, I want to have self-pity. That hasn't happened.
Right.
But it is an allowed thing past the gatekeeper of submission to Jesus, of my mind and feelings.
When I felt self-pity, right?
Whereas the
'cause
shark story is like,
I'm
you can't
allowing
stop
my
that.
pride to become like to like I believe that I'm the most important.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
There's a belief,
Yes.
and belief isn't in the mind; it's in the heart. And so, therefore, I've got to take my mind and go look at my heart and say, "What's going on down there? That I'm feeling all this stuff that that's not
So I
helping
might
anybody."
prefer to say belief is an integration between what the mind and the heart, how they interact.
There is definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's close, right?
Yeah.
Because I would put the heart at lower than the mind, and the
There
body's
are-
on the surface.
Okay, so what I would say is they have a primary role in two different ways. The heart has its primariness, and the mind has a primariness too.
Sure.
But their primariness is not the same, so that they can each hold a form of primary and a form of secondary. So the heart has a primary thing for belief, but I think the mind has a primary thing too, and
Yeah.
they work together.
Well, I think they definitely work together, and the more they do, the better.
It's like repentance and faith and repentance. Which one is first? Well, either one can be first. They both can hold a primary.
So
and
you're
produce the
describing
other.
repentance as an act of the will within the mind's.
Repentance comes from faith, but you can also say repentance precedes faith.
Right.
Scripture lets them be in both roles.
Yeah.
They can both take the primary. Is what I'm saying.
But what you're saying is that faith is an act of the heart. Repentance is an act of the mind.
No, because repentance can be of the heart too. I was using it only as an illustration of how two things can have, atoms connected. They both have a primary thing when looked from their vantage point, but you can look at the other one and that has a primary.
Yeah.
But
What do
they're
you call
connected.
What do you call it when two species rely on each other?
Symbiotic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of like that.
Yeah. All right. Our emotion neutral. Well, we'll bring it up again. Okay. Looks like we've come to the end of our time a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so what are we listening to? You're listening on Second Thought with Mike and Luke. And if you've enjoyed the podcast and found something to consider, or perhaps a new thought that you've not had, or something you've never heard, we'd like to say go ahead and click on like and find somebody and talk about it. Talk about this.
Here's
what it
another one. If you're
generates.
still listening, and we appreciate you guys, we want 5-star reviews. So if you have a question
Are
for
there
us,
multiple stars on YouTube?
you can 5-star review on podcast platforms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you want to
Nice.
ask us a question and you're not a YouTube person,
Yeah.
go leave us a review and ask the question in there, and we'll get it.
Yeah.
And we'd love to reply.
Yeah. Start a good conversation. Help us on social media. Truth of freedom. Cheers.
All right.